Let's go. Religious freedom in American politics. 3 main points. First of all, religious freedom, the right to practice one's deepest convictions without impediment by states or other forms of dominance and suppression is as rare in history as it is precious to the history of the U.S. and to people around the globe. It is also under threat, including by some who claim to be its defenders. The actual promotion of religious freedom depends upon the clear, organized voice of people of faith to say no to systemic and structural violence. It's called negative freedom, or freedom from injustice, freedom from coerced religion, and to say yes to risking those convictions, one's deepest convictions, in public debate and practice on behalf of the common good. It's called positive freedom, the freedom to participate beyond individual preference, that is, to join in something larger than oneself. Like I said, those are bad seats. Fortunately, over time, people of faith have gradually demonstrated the value of religious practices as forms of spiritual and social capital that cultivate trust among people and that contribute to a sustainable planet. Conflicts are inevitable and will be ongoing. In other words, we're not going to resolve this today. I hope that's okay. And true religious freedom must sustain a radical normative pluralism. Winifred Sullivan, in her book, The Impossibility of Religious Freedom, argues that. So, radical normative pluralism without privileging historic institutional dominance of particular traditions. I can take a breath now. That's the overview. Right. Going back to the history, how many have heard of Mary Dyer? A couple. Anyway, fascinating woman. Recognized the context. Came over to Boston in the 1650s, where there were blasphemy laws on the books. And the laws were to control infection and dissemination, which would, in fact, have tainted the purity of Puritan Boston. So the Quakers, who were perceived as threats to the peace of Puritan Boston, were banished upon pain of death. Mary Dyer, a Quaker, outspoken Quaker, was banished in 1659, returned in 1660, and then was hanged on Boston Common June 1st, 1660, for no reason other than being a Quaker. All right, just to recognize where we come from on these matters. And here's her 1660 letter appealing to the governor. John Endicott demands repeal of all blasphemy laws so that the truth and servants of the Lord may have free passage amongst you. All right, now here's her statue on Boston Common. Anybody been there to see it? All right, cool. All right, and, it says, Mary Dyer, Quaker, witness for religious freedom, hanged on Boston Common, 1660. And then this quote, my life not availeth me in comparison to the liberty of the truth. All right, so my point is, among religious folk, religious freedom is about truth liberty. Roger Williams actually predated Mary Dyer's arrival in Boston in 1631, so very early on. He was banished in 1635. He was a Baptist. All right, and published in 1644 The Bloody Tenet of Persecution, which was a religious argument for religious liberty. Forced worship, he said, stinks in the nostrils of God. It is the will and command of God that a permission of the most paganish, Jewish, Turkish, or anti-Christian consciences as worships be granted to all men in all nations and countries. And they are only to be fought against with that sword which is only in soul matters able to conquer, to wit, the sword of God's Spirit, the Word of God. All right? Mary Dyer, truth liberty. Roger Williams, soul liberty. All right? Religious arguments for religious freedom is trust in reasoning and discourse and language, the experimentation of living out one's faith in public on religious grounds. So again, religious freedom came from these religious reasons, right, which is easy to miss in the language of the First Amendment. Because the first clause, the Establishment Clause, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, is first, right? That's to remove the coercion. And then the second clause, the Free Exercise Clause, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, is the one that is very much at stake in current debates. All right, so central point, religious freedom has religious sources. Truth and peace depend upon the trusting relations between people that violence and force interrupt, and that religions foster through their exercise. Pinker depends on argues along with Immanuel Kant, who in 1795 wrote an essay entitled On Perpetual Peace, It says there are three causes that will bring peace to the globe. Leviathan, right? Hobbes, that monopolizes violence, to bring Max Weber into the picture, right? That contains violence so it doesn't spread into unending rivalry. But Leviathan, right? A state where people have a voice. Second, trade. Produces peace. Because if you kill your trading partner, it's kind of bad for trade, right? And it's just common sense. I mean, I'm boiling it down to its very simplistic. Third, though, is participation in international organizations like the United Nations or the World Bank or World Social Forum. Pick your NGO, right? And these three have been documented. We now have a science of peace building to understand how these three work. Every religious tradition is international in scope. And every religious tradition is deeply connected to trade. I wrote a book about religion in shopping malls, after all. If you go to Ankara, Turkey, the mall has Kocatepe Mosque, the largest mosque in Ankara, has a big shopping mall underneath it. It's astonishing. All right, so religious freedom has religious sources and contributes to this peace that we experience these days. Universal Declaration of Human Rights in 1948 went to the language of rights. Right? Everyone has the right to freedom of thought, conscience, and religion. This right includes freedom to change his religion or belief, and freedom either alone or in community with others and in public or private to manifest his religion or belief in teaching, practice, worship, and observance. All right? This language of rights is very helpful, of course, at spreading this ideal, but it also can constrict what freedom means. And this is the law that really has been in debate and discussion in the current controversies, the Religious Freedom Restoration Act from 1993. How many have heard of it? And the key language is right here, right? Substantially burdening a person's exercise of religion, and then government must use the least restrictive means if there is a compelling governmental interest, to limit the practice of religion. So, present controversies then, the Affordable Care Act and its dissenters. How many have heard of Hobby Lobby? Almost everybody, all right, if they do as much. What we have here then is a corporation claiming exemption from federal law on religious grounds. Yeah, all right. Anybody see some connections with other cases? Citizens United, right? Laws tend to overlap, interweave. A majority, Christians, and evangelicals, part of the broader Christian majority still in the United States by far, claim protection under religious freedom in an effort to avoid paying for services to women, mostly. Recognize what's going on here, right? And if you want to follow up more on this, chapter 5 of my book, Empire of Sacrifice, focuses on the way gender is constructed, has been constructed in American history to exclude and to perpetuate the privilege and rights of the majority. I believe that's what we have happening in this case as well. Marriage equality and its despisers then, second case in 2012, when I wrote Empire of Sacrifice, 38 states had DOMA laws. Everybody know what a DOMA law is? Defense of Marriage Act, right, on the books. Following the federal Defense of Marriage Act passed under President Clinton in 1996. In 2015, you've heard of this too probably, Obergefell versus Hodges overthrows the federal DOMA law, which then thereby invalidates the state laws as well. And we've seen a remarkable change in public opinion over the years. The majority, led by Kennedy, written by Kennedy, the minority was written by the dissent by Roberts. Here's what Kennedy said: sincere personal opposition to marriage equality cannot be enacted law and public policy without doing harm to and violating the 14th Amendment, which guarantees equal protection, but open and searching debate should continue. More, the First Amendment ensures that religious organizations and persons are given proper protection as they seek to teach the principles that are so fulfilling and so central to their lives and faiths, and to their own deep aspirations to continue the family structure they have long revered. All right, so creating an openness for participation and difference as well. Justice Roberts throws down the gauntlet. The decision creates serious questions about religious liberty. So going to the First Amendment rather than the 14th. Now the majority, Christians, seek to undermine marriage equality by appealing to the First Amendment right that was forged to protect the practices of minorities. I believe, in short, that this effort to appeal to religious liberty as a way to dissent from marriage equality is doomed to fail because religions can't be legislated into truth. Right? Again, irony. See again Madison, Winifred Sullivan, and others. So what we have going on is religious violence, actually, through an appeal to religious freedom, which is why I said religious freedom is under threat, even by some people who claim to be its defenders. When religious freedom is used to perpetuate privilege and power over others, what I call an empire of sacrifice, innocent domination, this truly is a threat to religious freedom, even if it's dressed up in the guise of protecting it. Just as, an analogy, SAT question, just as torture is a threat to American values, even if intended to protect them. Religions exist to end violence, insofar as possible. Again, it's why they endured for millennia. Why we participate? Because we find peace in this practice. All right? And American history demonstrates this truth from the very beginning. Religions provide people spiritual peace and promote civil justice. I talk in the book about deep peace. Right? Basic peace is the absence of war. Policy peace would be the ways our policies and laws can promote greater justice, but there's a deep peace to be found in these traditions that, again, have endured for millennia and can collaborate and cooperate. And that's the lively experiment of religious freedom in America, is that we can really have Jews, Christians, Muslim, Buddhists sitting down together, working on common projects, right, and debating our deepest truths with each other. So, current controversies indicate religious minorities, especially Christians in America, identifying with the narratives and discourses of oppressed and minorities. All right? This is the sort of acid that will eat away at the argument in some ways. So the irony is, by identifying with this discourse from minority traditions, actually evangelicals, Roman Catholics, are going to become more pluralistic in time. Or so that's my hope. The power of these narratives and discourses must overcome narrow interests, shrinking dominance on the part of Christians in America, and amen for that. And we'll do so when we pay attention to their religious dimensions, not just discourses of rights. So how does this work in practice? Negative freedom, saying no to systemic and structural violence. Take the case of Orlando. The shootings. Here is Bishop Robert Lynch, the Roman Catholic Bishop of Orlando. Sadly, it is religion, including our own, which targets gays, lesbians, and transgender people. Attacks today on LGBT men and women often plant the seed of contempt and hatred, which can ultimately lead to violence. This is that self-criticism that we heard about from the pulpit today. All right? That ability to critique oneself. This is what our religions teach us. Right? We confess before we go to the table. So take the Southern Baptists, for example. You would think they would be right there with the evangelicals, right? By and large. There was in June, they were gathering in assembly, and they were debating a resolution about a mosque that was being built in Nashville. You know, they wanted to prohibit this building of a mosque, and the guy who's the chair of the president of the Ethics and Religious Liberty Commission said, "Hold on here, what are we doing? We're Baptists. We believe in soul liberty." And then he goes on to say, well, if you're shutting down the building of this mosque, then we're not going to be able to build churches in San Francisco and New York, these, heathen places, right? So it's a backhanded support for religious freedom, but nevertheless, it shows how, the tradition can be invoked, the history can be invoked in order to create greater tolerance and pluralism.